My father was a big businessman in hotels, and he also had a lot of property. Well, I had an aunt that's in Seattle, and things were very bad in South Africa at the time, and there was a great slump in property in that. So my aunt wrote to my mother and asked her, why don't you come over to Seattle? She says, America, because she says everything's booming over there. He did a lot of shopping in London. For this new hotel, he bought about 1,000 rolls of bedding, blankets and sheets and things for this new hotel he was taking over in Seattle. My father happened to just get the last 3 berths on that Titanic in the second class. The first class was full up. Couldn't get there. We just had the last 3 berths on the Titanic. We had a 3-berth cabin altogether, my mother and father and I, just the 3 of us. As he went up on the gangway, my father turned right and my mother said to him, do you feel ill? He says, no, he's all right. So we went down to our cabin. Then we came back on deck and we stood by the rails of the Titanic looking over. And there's a boat called the New York, if you remember. And I don't know what she did, but she sort of came towards the Titanic, nearly ran into her. And my father then said it was a bad omen. I have been on a lot of ships before, because we used to come over from South Africa every year. My mother used to buy all her clothes in Bond Street, London, and we used to go back to South Africa. I've been on ships before, but not one as beautiful as that. It's really a floating palace. It was really beautiful. The oil paintings alone was magnificent, and the carpets and the cutlery that's on the table, real silver, beautiful stuff. It was really a floating palace.
In 2013, I bought up a Titanic collection from a private Titanic collector. It was inexpensive. It was literally a box full of Titanic books, posters and rarity items. But it was so much more than that, because the seller was none other than Mr. Derek R. Walker. He was one of 2 co-founders for the now extinct Titanic Society of South Africa, also known as the TSSA. It wasn't the usual items in the collection, because the collection came with these large binders filled with archival materials from the old Titanic Society South Africa. We're talking names, telephone numbers, home addresses, and events that transpired during the existence of the TSSA. I called up the seller and I said, I don't care who's interested in it, consider it sold. I'm taking it. I had already begun the construction of the TINTANIC, and I was nearing the halfway mark when another unbelievable event happened. The South African company EXPORSA was presenting Premier Exhibitions' Titanic the Artifact exhibition in both Johannesburg and in Cape Town, and it featured 144 real artifacts from the wreck of the real Titanic. I desperately wanted to be a part of that, because it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work with real artifacts. This kind of thing only happens in the movies. However, there was one little snag. I didn't have money. I didn't even have money for a ticket. A regular Jack Dawson here, gambling his luck. I contacted the organizers and I told them who I was and all about the TINTANIC project, which was still only in development phase. I mean, I built some of the ship, but we were nowhere near ready. I had a secret card up my sleeve. Remember those TSSA documents that nobody wanted except me? Well, it turns out that these carried historical importance, and the organizers were very keen to add these to the Titanic Artifact exhibition as South African artifacts. Archival documents carry historical significance. There are 2 thoughts on artifact recovery. Is it conservation and preservation, or is it grave robbing? I was in 2 minds myself before I saw the first artifact. walked into the exhibit and I saw the twisted and torn remains of a giant porthole missing its glass. And I realized in that moment that this was about preserving the history for future generations. Instead of it being at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean where it's rotting away and no one sees it in utter darkness, this thing has been brought to the surface, and it's there for us to learn about the Titanic disaster and what the wreck has to tell us about what happened that night. Well, I was only there to hang up the documents from the old Titanic Society South Africa when they asked me, well, what are you doing with yourself for the rest of the summer? And I said, well, I have to get back home to my boat. I've got to go finish my boat. So they offered me a job as an usher. You know, toilets to the left, no photographs, that kind of thing.
Welcome to Titanic, the artifact exhibition.
I thought, well, we could really use the money. It would mean a slight delay in the construction schedule of the TINTANIC, but on the other hand, it was an opportunity to have a dream job. I wasn't really supposed to do much but keep a lookout, but me and my big passion for the Titanic just couldn't resist. The first 3 people that I took on a tour, it lasted more than 3 hours, and at the end of it they enjoyed it so much that they all stuffed a 100 Rand bill into my hands. And I was like, okay, I'm not even sure if I can accept gratuity, but I took the concept to the organizers and they immediately turned me into their host and tour guide for the entire exhibition. The only condition was that I had to get the storytelling of the Titanic disaster down to under an hour. I ended up taking 25,000 people on hourly tours. It was entertainment 101, and I understood that from the get-go, because you have to get them involved in this story. This was a personal experience which allowed people the opportunity to ask questions and have them answered on the floor. I understood that you had to create an entertainment element to it. From the first rivet in construction to the excitement and thrill of the days leading up to departure in Southampton. All these little cute anecdotes and tales made for a very interesting tour concept. And that's what we were all looking for and hoping for, was the entertainment value. Something that the audio guide couldn't offer you. That when highlighted can really connect you to 1912.
Sometimes we could walk into the first class, you know, but we never bothered much. We sat up on deck because it was nice on there. It was sort of shut in. Yes, we met one lady on board. She'd never been on a ship in her life before. She had one daughter and a husband, and she always used to say, oh, I'm so nervous. I've never been on a ship, you know. She wasn't very happy about it at all, but I don't know what became of her or her family. Beautiful food, really very good food. We had a very good breakfast and good lunch and a good dinner at night, and there was always something after if you wanted. We weren't long enough really on the ship to be entertained, you know, because we were only 4 days on the ship when the accident happened. I never seen them play any games or anything like that. The beautiful swimming pool down below. We sat up on deck because it was nice on there. It was sort of shut in. And then it got very cold, and we went inside. It had a beautiful library and everything. You could sit down and look at the books. And it was on a Sunday, and the band was playing.
I saw the potential of a unique added attraction experience for the exhibit before anybody else did. The show only offered visitors audio guides, which are good in their concept. They have, you know, little melodies playing and they tell you the story. But the problem is they tell you the same story over and over, and they leave out a lot of detail which could only be done through the use of a tour guide. This was an opportunity for the exhibit to feature something different. And of course, a private guided tour became very popular for visitors. I had to be an actor to entertain the masses, all sorts of crowds, and you had to change direction on a whim. You have to be very, very on the ball because the conversation can go in any direction. All the anecdotes and the tales, the somber moments, the bittersweet ones, from this happy-go-lucky ship into this, okay, now the disaster is here, it's time to become somber. It's about the death toll, it's about what really happened that night. It's a tragedy in every sense. You have to convey that emotion without losing your step. What I did was start a business in a business that already existed. It was amazing to note how the Johannesburg audiences wanted a drama-based story, whereas the Cape Town audiences were longing for a more enlightened retelling of the story, and then the drama intertwined with it as well. 1/4 of the people who visited the Titanic artifact exhibit opted in for the tours. Cape Town was also interesting because it was extremely hot and humid, but the exhibit just had all these air cons going, and it was all this cold temperatures. They were dropping the temperature, especially around the disaster parts, so that you could convey a feeling of, oh, the iceberg is approaching, oh, what it was really like that night. It was all about entertainment value, all about entertainment. So everybody else in Cape Town was dying of the heat, wearing sleeveless shirts, flip-flops and shorts, and I'm a popsicle. I was interviewed a lot. I made my first television and radio debuts, and it planted the seeds for what was to come with TINTANIC.
Went to bed at about 10:30, 11, and I don't know what happened. All of a sudden the Titanic sort of hit something. She was going at an awful rate. As she hit the iceberg, she was thrown back. Then she hit it again and come back. The third time she stopped. So my father went up. He said, "You go up and see what it is." He went up on deck. He says, "Nothing much," he says, "they only struck an iceberg." There was a lot of lifeboats there and people on rafts, you know, some of them frozen dead. It was terrible. And they threw all the chairs over. Everything went over the side. Oh, it must have been quite a time, because it took 2.5 hours to go down. It took a long time to go down. Must have been a good while. I was dressed ordinary, because I got dressed, but I lost my coat. I had some old woman's cape. I don't know, somebody must have pinched my coat, I think. I lost that. Oh, it was bitterly cold. Terrible. The band was still playing for a long time after. Even when we were in the lifeboat, we could still hear it. They were playing some other hymns besides "Hear My God to Thee." And it was really beautiful because you would hear it out in the lifeboats as you moved away. Those men were very good there. I believe they were all drowned too. See, she went down that and people sort of slide, couldn't hold their feet. And you heard the screams. It was terrible, the screams of the people. It was terrible. Everybody was very sad, you see. Everybody lost somebody on there. A lot of them went down in their cabins, never woke up, I don't think. You could see as she was sinking, the lights disappeared underwater till she got to the boilers and she exploded. I turned my head away. Well, I wouldn't look at her. And we had to go quite a long way off because of the suction. Oh, it was bitterly cold. Terrible. I hoped my father would get off the ship, you know. That's all I was hoping for. He must have gone down with the ship. He went down with Reverend Carter. There's a fellow there. He made friends with Reverend Carter. He went down with him, I think. I know we had to bail the water out a lot because the boat was leaking. It was a terrible experience. We were 9 hours in the open boat till we were picked up by the Carpathians. And when we were on the Carpathia, every lifeboat that came in, and my mother and I went to see if my dad was in one of those boats. But no, he must have gone down with the ship.
The artifact exhibition catered everything that you would want to see in an exhibit, from big life-size sets and room recreations to hallways, to dinnerware, chinaware, and cutlery pieces. Personal belongings from real Titanic passengers or crew that has been salvaged from the ocean floor. And in Cape Town, the exhibit was on 2 different levels, so I had to climb 3 stories of stairs just to get to the upper level. Then the exhibit changes from this excitement of the sailing to a cold, dark, depressing environment where you know that the ship is going to hit the iceberg now, and then the mood changes. Being a tour guide and an actor and a presenter for the show, you had to keep it light-hearted at some moments. You want to put them on the decks of the Titanic, the way it happened. You want them to experience it in all of its thrills and all of its joy, the interesting parts about passengers and crew and what they went through on that voyage. That's what it's about, taking them back in time and creating an event and an experience that is unmatched. Now, there were 144 artifacts on display, and my favorite artifact was initially not my favorite artifact. It was this gold-plated chandelier from the first class smoking room on A deck, and it was all twisted and mangled and bent. And generally when I would do a tour, I would just rush past it and say to people, the chandelier, okay, great, and then go on to the next artifact. Then the significance of this artifact struck me, that this was a light fixture from the first class smoking room. It's probably one of the last rooms inside the Titanic to flood, and it must have flooded destructively, is why there are no light bulbs attached to it. They must have burst, under impact, or they must have burst from the pressure of the ship sinking. This room was rumored to be the last room in which chief designer Thomas Andrews was seen alive. And he must have been looking up at these very chandeliers moments before his death. When the ship was rearing its back end up into the air, the lights went out, came on briefly, blinked, and then went out forever. And the significance of that artifact is that when that light went out, every other light on board the Titanic also went out at the same time. It was a short circuit, and it just all went black. Among all the people who came out to the exhibit was one Mr. Redmond Taggart, who was this elderly gentleman who came walking up to the exhibit, said he wanted to talk to me and tell me that he was a descendant of the Andrews clan. He was the great nephew of Thomas Andrews, the chief designer of the real Titanic. And at first I thought, yeah, right. Because a lot of these people come up to the exhibit, and about 90% of them don't check out. They're not really related to anybody on the Titanic. But Redmond Taggart was a different case entirely. He had the soft-spoken persona. He was like Thomas Andrews would have been, and he could tell you all these stories about, the Andrews clan and the Andrews family tree and where he exactly fit into the story. His great-grandmother was the sister of Lord James William Peary of Harland and Wolff shipyards, who had introduced the idea of the Titanic and the Olympic to the White Star Line and to J. Pierpont Morgan, and had it financed. It was their dream. He said that for years the Andrews family never spoke about the Titanic disaster out of embarrassment. And they realized that, this wasn't a thing to be embarrassed about, that people were celebrating it and they were understanding it, and they learned so much from that disaster, and that they need not hide in shame anymore. Redmond Taggart was a wonderful, wonderful man, and I spent many hours around him, in my private capacity. Any moment I could get off, I would visit Redmond Taggart. It was just wonderful to have him in my life for that brief amount of time. Redmond was a superstar, and he even launched the Titanic for me in 2017, which I think was the most beautiful moment of my life. I'll never forget that experience. I'm so grateful I got to have that.
When the island breeze reached a position in the North Atlantic, marked on the charts as 41 degrees 46 minutes north and 50 degrees 14 minutes west, she stopped her engines and silently drifted over the wreck site. Deep down beneath them was the Titanic, where she had lain for 84 years in darkness and at peace. Our mother, in a wheelchair, attended a service on the open deck for those 1,500 souls that had perished at this place. The memories came flooding back to her as she remembered that nightmare that took place here on the 15th of April 1912. After the service, a lone piper played a lament on his pipes as she was helped to the ship's rail. She wept silently as she let a wreath fall on the dark waters below her. This was to be her last sea voyage, and the fulfillment of a wish throughout the whole of her life, to pay her last respects to her dear departed father. At 7:30 p.m. on the 20th of January 1997, our dear mother passed away quietly in her sleep after suffering from pneumonia. She had left behind 4 sons, 2 daughters and 40 grandchildren. She had been born into a wealthy family, and one would imagine a good future to look forward to.